There we are. Hi, everybody. I'm here with Jacie Jeffers, who's joined us to talk about IEFA, authentic integration. She's the guru for all things IEFA. And I've just really appreciated her taking her time. So thank you, Jacie, for taking time out of your day to do this chat with me. A little bit about Jacie. She is currently the 6 through 12 curriculum coach for IEFA in District 2. And also, she is super busy right now as she's a remote teacher working with students who have been struggling. I think you said you had over like 200 students right now that you're working with. Amazing. So, thank you once again. And I'm just going to turn it over to Jacie, and she has some responses to the survey that you all took, and we'll just kind of have a chat around different things. Okay, go ahead, Jacie.
Thank you, Melanie. I'm so honored and blessed to be here and relish these opportunities to work with pre-service teachers. If we can implement as much as we can at the college level. And we were visiting earlier before about units versus lessons. And that's something that I really like to see, because I think it's really hard to just implement a lesson, right? And really do it justice, because Indian education isn't that one thing that we learned that one day, right? Culture is part of everything, not only American culture, but we have lots of diversity. Asian American students, we have Mexican American students, we have students from a large population in Billings Public Schools right now from the Peloponnesian area of the US, or of the island region, from the West Indies. We have Puerto Rican, Tibetan, all over the world. So, and even when you're talking about culture from students coming from different parts of the country. And so we want to recognize those cultures and those differences, and how we can better meet the needs of our students. Because if we don't recognize those in the classroom, students don't feel like they belong to a community. And so if it's that one thing on that one day, then it's just not really giving good credit and doing justice to that culture. So I think it's really important that it is a little bit more interwoven. We have a grant right now where the teachers are asked to write one lesson, and they're like, I just one lesson one day. And we're like, okay, you can write the unit, but just give us one of those lessons to post on the site. So it becomes a challenge sometimes. So I do really appreciate that. And so one of the things that I do kind of like to start with, and in my classroom, I taught social studies. I would ask my students this at the beginning of the year, and I would ask them what their relationship was with the word Indian. And I would do this as a pre-assessment and then a post kind of formative to help drive my instruction. And that was the purpose behind the survey as well, because I don't want to cover things that you don't know. And I don't want to say something that might offend either. So I want to be careful and cognizant of that. But then I also want to really challenge folks as well. And I would like to be able to hone in on those areas that are going to be challenging. Please excuse my casual Friday attire. I actually was going to run upstairs and change beforehand. I was like, I literally was doing grades and entering stuff the minute before. I was like, oh, it's 2:24. I got to go. And
it's fine. We're all casual here, so we're good.
Well, and I'm wearing my lacrosse stuff. So
I like it. Very cool.
So it's kind of indigenous. So so this was the first thing that I'd kind of asked, and I was, it's so interesting. That I was raised to be proud of my indigenousness, and I was raised to embrace the word Indian. And that, to me, growing up, was never an offensive word. I think it can be used in an offensive way, but I never really had this negative relationship with it. But I always knew that it bothered other folks, and so I try to be careful with it. I mean, obviously it's a misnomer, right? It's not even correct, but the United States government does classify the race as American Indian. It's not Native American, it's American Indian. So we try to kind of stick with that. Indigenous is a pretty popular word that is used. Native obviously is very popular as well. But if I'm referring to a student in my class, right, I'm not going to refer to that student as Native American. I'm going to refer to him as his tribe.
Mm.
And so I was just telling the story earlier today. We were visiting about Howland, who is being the first Indigenous woman to be, and she is, oh gosh, she's Navajo, I think, maybe Nez Perce, I don't remember. So, and that's the thing, is that we want to give the tribal affiliation to the student, and so, or to the person that we're talking about. Now I have to look up Howland and
Yeah.
see what she is, right?
Well, and I really appreciate this part of the conversation because quite often I'll have students ask me like, I don't know what terms to use, right? Like when they're talking in front of the class and when they're talking with the students, they're like, I know some people say, Native American, some people say American Indian, and these different are indigenous, and our students often are, they just feel a little leery of saying the wrong thing. So I really love that you're addressing this.
And I think all of those things, and it was a really popular question as well. And I think all of those terms are appropriate. Like I said, Indian isn't a word, but I use it. And then I try to be really careful with it too, because I don't want to offend people.
Yeah.
And so now I'm looking, and the first article I found on Representative Howland, who would be the first Indigenous woman to be elected or to a cabinet position. And some of our representatives in Montana are, well, one of our representatives, Senate actually confirms the cabinet, but is protesting or going to recommend that she not be promoted to this position.
Hmm.
And it doesn't actually say her tribal affiliation.
Hmm.
I'm not finding it in here.
Yeah.
And so when you know somebody's tribe, that's what you want to refer to them as by. So I would say Representative Howland from, and I'm going to find it now so that I can kind of use it in a sentence. So it's Deb Howland.
I'll look too while you're looking.
Tribal. And this is the thing, is that when you devote this, oh, she's Laguna Pueblo. And so we would want to refer to her, Deb Holland is the first Laguna Pueblo woman to be appointed as a cabinet member. And she would also be the first Laguna Pueblo or Indigenous woman that would be in a cabinet position, and the Department of Interior, which oversees the Department of
Indian Affairs.
Yeah. So this
yeah.
is super interesting and very important time for Indigenous people. So I was referring to a student who had made kind of a light joke about Indigenous people in Hollywood. And I said, oh, and this nice little Crow kiddo that was in my class. So he was Crow. And so I didn't refer to him as this Native American student in my class. He's either a student, or you would try to refer to them by their tribe.
Yeah.
And so,
and what I love about this too is that means you as the teacher need to really get to know your students, right? Like it has to go below a surface level of knowing your students.
Absolutely. Yes. And which actually kind of gets us into the next step. So that's perfect. So that was kind of, I was trying to answer these questions here that folks had. I want to know how I can make sure the materials I'm using are approved and validated by tribal cultures, experts, and not spurious, inaccurate, or offensive. And I love, love, love that question, because that is the first step, is that you are asking yourself that question. And first of all, use your IEFA resource, whoever that is in your district, if you have somebody. Obviously, people run stuff by me all the time. I love that people run it by me. The hard part is when I say, well, it's not really appropriate to compare origin stories to the origin stories of comic strips. So, I have to have those conversations as well. So you have to be prepared, to be disturbed a little bit sometimes, and that what you found might not be appropriate, and it might not be what you wanted to do. And so there's certain things that are sacred. There's certain things that are not, you haven't been given permission to share. And if you're having a difficult time finding it, that's probably why. It's the same thing as a church, right? Our ceremonies are sacred. Our traditions can be sacred. And if you're having difficult time finding those things, it's because we haven't given permission to share them. So, and that's okay. And you can sometimes find the people that will share it with you. It just takes a lot of time to find that. And I think it's important to remember that our communities have been oppressed. Our religions were specific laws against us practicing our religion and our spirituality. And so you could maybe understand why we're a little bit apprehensive to share that information, because when Europeans first arrived in North America, we were very, very open to sharing our ceremonies and our ways, and those were often used against us. And so now we've kind of retreated from that gift giving culture that we've had. And I think now we're starting to open back up and share our ceremony, but we're just a little bit more cautious. And so you kind of have to keep that in mind, that not everybody is going to want to share. And there's certain things that are painful or hurtful that we're not going to want to ever really share. Some people won't, right? I might not, a Holocaust survivor might not want to share their experience, but somebody else might.
Yeah.
Boarding schools, same thing. We might have grandmas that are very willing and open to sharing, but others that are not, and it's too painful. So I think we have to keep all those things in mind. Hopefully I'll kind of get you some good stuff to get you going. And there is another resource, and I think I forgot to include it here, but it's a resource it's put out by OPI for analyzing resources. So if it's a DVD, it has a list of kind of checkpoints and things to look for. So I think that that's a really useful document and a good place to start as well, just for your own, if you don't have an IEFA resource. So
another idea I have for this chat time is, if you have a link, we can put it in the chat here. And then before I close out our meeting, I will save the chat and I'll upload that, because that saves it as like a document. And then they can click those links later when they're watching this.
Resources, OPI. Oh, and I'm doing it on my other computer. So,
or I can look it up.
Yeah. Okay. So it's Montana Indian Education for. Oh, wrong one. Nope, that's not it. Apologize. Usually have it pretty handy. Evaluating resources in sorry guys.
And if we can't find it now, we can look it up
well,
later, and I'll upload it as a separate link as well.
And if you want to maybe look for it now, know that it's there, and it's it might even be under, on that first page, widely used resources or whatever. So I need to know the foundations of Indian education. I have essentially no exposure to what it looks like in the classroom. I also do not know what essential understandings are, or would like to hear more about those. I would also like to hear more about Native culture understandings of education, so I can incorporate those cultural differences more into my classroom. So I think the biggest thing that we want to be careful with is stereotyping and I know that that's probably not what this person was doing, but to be careful not to stereotype our Indigenous students and saying, well, they're only going to learn a certain way. I think it's important to remember that if we introduce a variety of different ways of thinking and learning and assessing and our schemas and how we think about things, will meet the needs of our students. But it is important to also understand some of the deep-rooted cultural differences, whether the student is an urban Indian growing up in Billings, Montana, or was on the reservation and came to Billings, or you're teaching on the reservation as well, you might find that some of the jobs, those are some of the most widely available jobs after graduation. Plus, I think you get like $10,000 towards your student loans. So it's important to understand the difference. So I kind of addressed this in a couple different ways. So the foundations are the 7 essential understandings. It's important to uncover, and we've kind of talked about this, everyone's culture in the classroom, and then exposing students to multiple historical perspectives, right?
Mhm.
And so I think I might have specifically looked up this person to see what their area was, and I think it might have been social studies. So
Mm.
looking at primary source documents, doing close reads on those, and then analyzing, what does that mean? We take Deb Howland, and you think about her and the different perspectives and what people have said about her ability to be this cabinet member. So it's just really interesting. I always like to do current events, of course, because I was a social studies teacher. And so
Mhm.
we can look at those different perspectives. So we have one representative that says this and another senator that says this, and kind of finding what everybody's perspective is on that. And
Yeah.
then just kind of for an example. And then it is important to remember that Indigenous culture from historically, and these things don't really go away. And just like anything in sociology, you have to be really careful. And, not all people that are from Europe were individualistic, and not everybody in the United States who considers themselves non-Indigenous or, from the white community
Mhm.
uh, is individualistic, right?
Mhm.
And so when we look at individualistic versus collectivist, the culture of North and South America is more collectivist, right? But we don't want to say everybody, these are all that way, and that's sociology 101, right?
Mhm.
These are the general trends that sociologists have come up with after, rigorous studies of, meta-analysis and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And so we have to be careful. But I mean, you might look at this and be like, I'm American and I'm not competitive at all, right? I'm a cooperative person. And so that's what we have to be
Yeah.
careful of. But these styles, everybody can benefit from these styles, right? And I think everybody can benefit from these kinds of things, right? We know that cooperative group in a classroom has an effect size of 0.83
Mhm.
according to Hattie's research. So cooperative learning, right, it doesn't mean that only Indigenous students are going to benefit from
Right.
this. So
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we do have to remember that we tend to find is the challenge to authority. So you as a teacher
Mm.
are automatically seen as an elder to most Indigenous students,
Mm.
especially if they grew up a little bit more traditional. And I don't really necessarily like that word to say, oh, they're traditional. That kind of implies that they're not modern. But let's say they're growing up in a household that has connections to their culture and history, right? More connection.
Yeah.
They they might tend to see a teacher as an elder, as an authority, and questioning them and trying to go to them for guidance, to get makeup work or what I need to do to be successful might be seen as a challenge, right? Because we're taught at a young age to basically sit down and listen, right?
Mm.
Um, and when we listen to elders, we don't write either.
Mm.
And so we tend to find that that's kind of the most common trend that we've seen with our Indigenous students. But hopefully you have somebody you can connect with the kiddo in a different way, and you can go to them. Just remember that they might not necessarily come to you to ask for help. We get teachers that say that a lot. Well, they won't come to me for help. Well, if they come to you for help, that is seen as a challenge.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that makes sense, Melanie, but
No, it does. And it makes me think about when I was teaching in Oregon. A lot of my students were from central Mexico. Their families had come up and were migrant workers. And I found like one of the key things I learned early on about their culture is that it was very disrespectful for them to look at an adult in the eye,
Sure.
especially if they were in trouble, per se. And so, here in our mainstream United States culture, we expect children to look at us when we're talking to them, and so on. And I think that, once I understood that cultural aspect of the students that I was working with, it made our interaction so much better, right? Like I didn't feel bad when they were looking down at the ground as I was talking to them, because I knew that that just was a part of how they interact in this kind of circumstance. And I didn't require them, to look up at me, right? I was respectful of that cultural understanding. Um, so in a way that's similar to what you're talking about here, that it's not culture, and we understand aspects of culture that operate often in what we call hidden ways, right? So as a child, you are acculturated to what you're sharing in this case of not asking the adult questions, right? To just constantly listen. A lot of the oral kind of language is really important. Um, and they aren't even aware that that's kind of like a cultural rule for them, right?
Yeah.
So then when teachers are like, why aren't you writing this down, or why, that kind of thing, then the student doesn't even know how to respond, because they're like, what are you talking about? Like, why, right? Kind of thing. So I think it's important as teachers for us to understand that culture is not like, not everybody is aware of all the things that they do in their behaviors that are attached to their culture. In fact, most of it is hidden and that it's operating implicitly.
Have you guys looked at the cultural iceberg?
Yes. So, oh, well, not in this class. So
Yeah.
that would be a good thing. I'll put some resources to that. But personally, in my own scholarship, I've been using that lately in a lot of my work. So I will upload some resources for the cultural iceberg. And I know last time you shared a little bit about how you adapted it. Um, so are you going to share that today too?
Yeah,
Good.
sure. So I got that from Jordan and
Yeah.
oh gosh, Miranda.
Yeah.
And so we indigitized we talk about indigenizing the classroom, right? We used to talk about it as decolonization, and then we decided that that was kind of you have these buzzwords that come out of
Hmm.
this discourse that is constantly happening in the
Hmm.
indigenous, Indian education community. And we decided that we were going to make it this positive word. So indigenizing the
Mm.
classroom.
Yeah.
And so we try to take as much as possible. So what they had done was at the top is the tree, right? And so
Yep.
that's the things that we see: clothes, dress, food. And then on the bottom, the roots, right? That is the hidden things, that these cultural norms or taboos or the rules, the unwritten things in society or in our communities that aren't, and we might not even know that they exist, right? It's funny that you say that. When I was a kid growing up, my dad would say, so my mom is Irish American, my dad is Irish Indian, so we're Métis, but he would say, don't look at me when I'm talking to you, right?
Mm.
And so it was
Yeah.
very different than what other people had. And there were things that were said and done in my house. I had no idea that that wasn't a thing that everybody did.
Right.
And you might have things in your house that, maybe everybody has to wait at the table,
Yeah.
or just little things that are part of culture that we don't even necessarily recognize. So
Yeah.
those are conversations we started at a very young age having with kids in social studies, so they can recognize, and because different, the psychology behind racism and prejudice, we've done tons of research and we know these things. There's a little thing that goes off in our brain, something's different.
Yeah.
On the plains of Savannah, that was very useful, right? We
Mhm.
knew enemy, the amygdala goes off, and the
Mhm.
prefrontal cortex reacts, and I need to protect my group because
Mhm.
I need to protect my genetic code.
Yeah.
And so those same kinds of things happen when something's different.
Yeah.
We have these reactions, and if we don't teach children to navigate those reactions, and that we don't necessarily need that anymore, we end up with the things that we've ended up with in society.
Yeah.
one group attacking and genocide. And
Yeah.
so the ultimate of the worst of that, the result of that behavior.
Yeah.
And so those are the things that, we're trying to transform, and Indian education is one of those ways.
Mhm.
And so a lot of time at the beginning, we would get this a lot. Well, why don't we have, this, that, or other kind of education? Well, those things are often really integrated into the curriculum, often, through literature, but that's even changing with Black history, right?
Mhm.
It's often a story told by African American people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I use the term Black often, but I know that offends people sometimes. But that again is the federal distinction, so I will use that. And my friends have said, no, it's fine. You can use Black. It's all
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so and I try to avoid white as well. That can be offensive. So I try to say non-Indigenous when I'm referring to. And so all these complicated things,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So in the classroom, I mean, we have these diverse classrooms. I think it's important to remember that your Indigenous students might not look Indigenous. We have this stereotype in our head of the, uh, you know, I mean, of course I didn't. I mean, we look
Mhm.
different.
Mhm.
People always thought my dad was Mexican, right? Oh, you're
Mhm.
Mexican? No, we're Indian, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't necessarily look Indian. Jordan, she's another gal that's, I mean, she's Grovant or
Mhm.
on me, and she might not necessarily on first inspection. There's the black hair and the dark skin and those kinds of things that we think of as typical, but that's
Yep.
just not, we aren't all that way.
Yep.
And so we have to remember, and we don't have necessarily Indigenous names, right? So we have to remember that we might have Indigenous students. So I literally go through all 200 of my students. I go through every single one of them, and I look at their demographics, and I identify whatever they identify as. I have a little key, and I keep that in mind because my Asian American students might be dealing with things right now that
Yeah.
I don't know if you've watched, I mean, it's just terrible.
Yeah.
Like what our Asian community is dealing with right now is horrific. And
Yeah.
so I'm keeping that in mind,
Yeah.
right? And
So you raise an interesting thing about demographics that I think would be good for our students to think about. Um, so the demographic information that we get from our school office, right?
Mhm,
Generally, that's been filled out by parents.
mhm,
And so it's parents saying, this, my child I'm identifying my child as this.
yes,
I can imagine that as you get into middle school and high school, that students may not
right,
specifically align with what that designation, right, that was given to the school.
right.
So I would think that, also in addition to looking at and the demographics you're given, but also have those conversations with the students directly, right? And
Yeah.
just say, like, how do you identify yourself? Like, let's talk about identity, kind of a thing.
Yes, you raise a very good point, right? The token Indian, right?
Mhm.
It was always funny because I was super proud. I'm like, I'm Indian, I'm well, in my
Yeah.
classrooms in high school. Uh, and so then I would become the token Indian in class. And I'm like, I wasn't raised on the res, we don't,
Yeah.
but so we don't want to over identify.
Mhm.
I have in my mind it's just, I just like my Asian, I'm just thinking of that because I know that this one kiddo, he's struggling. And when I called the mom today, I approached it just a little bit differently, I guess.
Yeah.
Because I know that in the back of my mind, but I'm not like, oh, I know you're Asian American and you must be, right?
Right. Right.
But in the classroom, when I taught, I started out from day one,
Yeah.
right? I learned their names, right?
Mhm.
If you want to show somebody you care about them,
Mhm.
learn their name.
Yeah.
Now we have pronouns, right? So
Mhm.
let's have that conversation a little bit too, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
how do you identify?
Yeah.
And please, please, please do the best you can,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then we start to get a little deeper, right? So name, pronouns, then we get a little deeper. We're going to talk about, your place, and we're going to talk about your community, and then we're going to start talking about your traditions and
Mhm.
where you're from. I had kids write where I'm from poems. And so through this writing process that I would do, and I spent 2 weeks
Mhm.
writing memoirs.
Mm.
And then so the students would write these memoirs for 2 weeks. That's all we did. And I found ways, really creative ways to integrate it with what I was doing.
Yeah.
But they wrote the memoirs and I read them
Mm.
and I would respond. We did it all digitally, so it was super easy to do too, because you're just right there with them,
Yeah.
commenting and reading. And the kids loved it because they're like, we're just drawing and writing and coloring and writing poems for two
We're
weeks. This
not
is
really
fabulous.
we're not really
And
learning. Yeah.
that that is how but they're writing, right? Because everybody has writing standards, right?
Yeah.
So you can always justify it that way. Math class, it might be a little bit more difficult, but you
Yeah.
could, I don't know, you could find a way to count the words or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know people have done really creative things. I
Yeah.
spent 2 full weeks getting to know my kids. That's how I found out who they were.
Yeah.
And then you start having these conversations, right? You build these communities, you're having kids share, and then who is identified and how they're identified. Now it's a little bit different for me because I'm remote and I'm not
Right.
doing memoirs for two
Yeah.
weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I know in my mind who is Indigenous. I know
Yeah.
who's Asian American. I know who's identifying as Latino. So those things help me to help them. And that doesn't mean that our non-ethnic communities aren't still struggling as well.
Yeah.
So we're still, but you have these cultural things and you know what's happening in the world and you're aware, and I think that's your responsibility as a teacher.
Yeah.
And we know with the Montana State Constitution that it's your responsibility to teach American Indian culture and heritage.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we get even deeper in this state in that it's a constitutional mandate, and I would say as an informed citizen. So that's a little bit more my opinion, but I kind
Yeah.
of leave it at that. So
Yeah.
I could talk about that for
I know.
days and days and days, right?
Yep. We
That's
shall move on.
yes. But I think there's really, really creative ways that you can do it in your classroom and get to know your kids. And you're absolutely right. It's about getting to know your students. Don't tokenize anybody. Let them open up. I had a kid share about Sundance, right?
Mm.
That wasn't something he was going to share on the first day. And then I don't know if you know who Superman is, but I had
Yeah.
his
Yeah.
class, and
Amazing.
he didn't want to talk about any of that. And I had a good relationship with him, and I would go over there and I would whisper,
Yeah.
do you want to share any of that stuff that we shared,
Yeah.
we talked about the other day at lunch? And he'd be like, nope,
Mm-hmm.
nope, I don't
Yeah.
want to share. Because he didn't want to be known as Superman's son.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was
Yeah.
he was who he was, and
Yeah.
that's what he wanted to be known as. So, and I get that, right?
Yeah.
But I've had some kids totally different.
Yeah.
I'm Walter Runs Above Sun, and I'm a fancy dancer,
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
a member of 5 different tribes. And so
Mm-hmm.
it
Yeah.
just, you have to know the kids. And
Yeah.
so the nitty gritty and really the essential understandings, this is my interpretation of them. And sometimes this really
Mm.
helps people. I think of number one, tribal diversity.
Mhm.
Number two, no two tribes are the same. We all have our
Yeah.
own languages. Individual diversity, no two tribal members are the same.
Mhm.
Uh, where they live, how their political affiliations, religion, spirituality, tradition, and language are alive and thriving today. Number four is reservations. 5 is federal Indian policy eras. And then 6 is historical perspective, and then sovereignty. And then I did link the essential understandings there as well. These are guiding principles. That's how I remember. They're guiding principles. They are for you and the child, and they are lifelong practices. There's no way I could ever know everything I need to know about sovereignty. There's 435 recognized tribes in the United States of America, right?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no way.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we have to do the best we can, right? We have to be practitioners
Yep.
of the knowledge that will help us to be the connection for students to wider range of perspective and understanding. So
Yeah.
So there's kind of my breakdown. That's how I look at them. And so we did pretty good on this. How many essential understandings are there? So 7, that was good. I think that that's good. We're getting there, right? This was good too, that they're not standards, right? Or the essential understandings are standard. True and false can be tricky, right?
Right.
They are standards. False. They are not standards. So this
Right.
was good. 60% of the people kind of saw that. They are woven. I like to think you have benchmarks, standards, right? And then you have, your units and lesson plans. Essential understandings are everywhere in there, right? There's deeper pieces, there's transformative pieces, there's surface level things, different content areas have different levels. And so they're everywhere, right? Guiding principles for all these things that we're doing all the time, whether it's a benchmark or a lesson for the day. And so one is, it's a continuum, it's a spectrum, and they're all, it's all of these are deeper at different parts, right? Tribal diversity is very diverse when you're talking about the United States of America, but not as diverse when you're talking about the Crow tribe.
Right.
So everything is a spectrum here as well. Let's see. Guiding principles, standards, curriculum, lesson plan. Yep, that's where I was going with that. True resources, meaningful resources. Why is it important? Why? I hope you're kind of getting that now. I like my tried and true, right? I don't like teachers to reinvent at the beginning. I like them to repurpose and redesign. I love the elementary lessons and adapting them for higher levels. I don't like people going out and just finding things that are out there, teacher paid teacher, whatever site that's out there. I think you take the lessons that are already there. You know that those are good to go. Then you kind of, you do them and you feel good about it, and you build this confidence, and then you have this idea and you're like, oh, I'm going to do that next time. Or, oh, I opened it up for this kid and I'm going to go research that. I'm going to find out more. So next time I'm going to do this and this with this lesson, and it's going to be bigger. And I mean, 20 years ago, my first lesson, I think I did What is an Indian? It's one of the very first lessons on OPI, right? And that's all I did. And I'm going to be comfortable with this. And I was Indigenous. I felt pretty comfortable, but I didn't know. And we didn't have a lot of resources at the time. So I took what we had and I made sure that I gave justice to those things, because experts and people that are way smarter than me and way more experienced than me created those things. So I think it's good to stick with those. You can adapt them and personalize them and make them fun. So I think OPI and the Smithsonian are your best sources. I love my site because, of course, I mean, it's my site, but I try to put things on here that are a little bit more I just thinking of something that's kind of an example. I try to put videos on here that I've vetted and I've used, and kids are, I'm still working on my senior social studies, you can tell. But if we take like
one thing as you were talking that I think is important for our students to understand, it can be overwhelming to think about often how do I just do this, right? Like it's this really big thing. But I think one thing to take away from what you're talking about is just try something, right? Instead of feeling paralyzed about the enormity of what could be done, just choose one thing on one day and do that, right? And then just keep growing from there, right? Don't ever stop, keep trying those things here and there, so that eventually it does just become a natural part of your practice. But it's okay if at the beginning this is new for your practice, and that the idea is, just start working with it a little bit.
Yes, you said that more beautifully than I could. I love it. I think that everything that you just said is super important and right on, because That's true with anything, right? And then we're asking people to do Indian education too, who
Yeah.
may not have grown up in Montana.
Yeah.
They don't know anything about the history, and how would you, right? I mean,
Yeah.
necessarily. So, you know, take what you don't bite off more than you can chew, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I love this, right?
Mhm.
10 years ago, it would have been completely flipped. So this is
Mhm.
fabulous. At some point, I won't even need to ask this question anymore.
Mhm.
So there's the Constitution. If you want the wording interactively, we would ask, why is this important?
Mhm.
Uh, Educate Montana says, and this, like I was saying before, this is kind of my opinion. But as a social scientist, I've always felt like it's really important to know where you're from. And for me, I challenge every American to know what indigenous land they are living on, right? So we're living on Crow tribal land, right? Traditionally.
Yeah.
And the Elk River Valley that we live in currently was a major trading hub for all the tribes of the plains. And just north of here in Judith Gap, there is archaeological evidence of every single tribe in Montana hunting bison in that area. So I think it's really important to know historically, and I challenge the world to know what indigenous land, who are the people that came before you,
Yeah.
and to have respect for that. So this is just kind of more of a social scientist opinion, being a good human being kind of thing. So I just challenge people to kind of think about this. So
Yeah. That's great.
tribes recognized by the state of Montana. This is fabulous too. I think at some point I won't have to ask this either. Reservations, this was fabulous too, right? And then we could be looking at 8 very soon with the Little Shell tribe and their federal
Yeah.
recognition.
Exciting.
I'm always on the lookout for good resources distinguishing between different tribes within Montana. I included this science site that we have. And so it's got some other resources that we've specifically built for science. And
Mhm.
so I tried to include that here. I think any of these, because they are STEM based and STEM is a continuum again, I think any of these could be adapted to the higher grades. So
Yeah.
I thought I would include that there as well. And my little pop downs are coming down, so they're not
Okay, I'm gonna stick those into the chat too, so they're
nice.
easily clickable.
I feel like we've kind of answered this too, don't you, Mel?
Mhm.
I just called you Mel. I don't even know if
No, yeah, I can go by Mel. That's fine.
um,
That's funny. How festive.
that is another thing about getting to know your kids,
Oh, yeah,
making sure that
yeah.
you shorten their name. You know, some kids don't like to go by Bob,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, 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 yeah,
So I guess I can call you Mel because you've given
yeah.
me permission now. I think
Yes.
it's always funny when people call me Jace, because
Oh, okay, yeah.
very few people have ever shortened my name, but I love Jace because that's like what my dad calls me. So
Oh, that's cool.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
How best to incorporate without singling out that particular culture? Uh, yeah, I mean, I think if you do it as part of larger cultural units, you are not you're spotlighting culture, right? Rather than spotlighting American Indians, right?
Yeah.
Because we want to transform students through knowledge and education, not, oh, here's the Indian novel and we're going to read it and take a quiz on Friday, right? We want
Yeah.
students as part of a larger unit. The American Indian author and the Black author and the Mexican American author, and these different books that we're reading that are part of a larger perspective. So
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
And I also think important here in this is particular culture. Again, it's going back to the essential understanding of that tribes have their own culture, right? So being very tribe specific um, when you are sharing anything, you know, go the extra mile to go like, well, what tribes actually maybe engage in this? I just was reading a piece of research on caring circles or sharing circles,
hmm,
and the authors of the article did not kind of go to that level. And it was bothering me, right? Because I said, in my head, I'm like, okay, is it like every, American Indian culture has this thing, right? And so then I kind of went down this like vetting, research hole of like, okay, what tribes in Montana maybe use this, practice and that kind of a thing. So yeah, that idea of and questioning it when you do run across it, right? So
Yeah. And I'll have teachers that are really super sensitive and they're like, but isn't this, and I'll be blown away. I'm like, gosh, I didn't even think about that, right? Um, and yeah, I mean, as time goes on, you become this very critical minded, uh, and they almost, it's the authority, right? This is the authority, and kids should be doing that as well,
mhm,
right? When we say Native American, we have a tendency. It's called Pan Indianism, right?
yes, yeah.
This term, this kind of buzzword that we've used in the discourse, that we are, again, 435 recognized tribes, right? And we're basically lumping them all into one, when, yes, we do have some things that are universal,
Yeah.
right? But each tribe, man, it's different with each tribe, how they used that or what it represented, or uh, you have the superficial things like, and it's not superficial, I don't know if that's the right word,
Surface
surface
level
level, right?
culture. Yeah.
Trees, housing, food, diet, just basic ways of living,
Mhm,
right? But then you have the deep things like the medicine wheel, right?
mhm,
Not used universally throughout the United States,
right.
only practiced in the plains.
Yeah.
Or the sun dance, only practiced in the plains.
Yeah.
But you might see dance, familiar things that are different, but like in the Southwest, the dance is very important, but dance is different in the Southwest. They might have different kinds of dances or different dancers, where in the plains they might have something different, or the
Mhm,
Iroquois have different things on their clothes, things like that. So
yeah.
um, you have universalities, but
Yeah.
then you have language, right?
Yeah.
Every language is different, which is
Mhm,
so fascinating and
mhm,
interesting to linguists and sociologists and things like that. And so interesting to find language families like Ojibwe being, the language families Algonquin, and how do they so isolated
mhm,
that all these different languages developed. And
yeah.
so that's really important to remember, all those things. And you're having those conversations with kids, and you are modeling that and saying, I'm ignorant to this, but I do have this little bit of, I do understand that there is a difference. I don't know what all the differences are, but I
Right.
know
Right.
they're different, right?
Yeah.
I know they're different.
Yes. And I that word modeling, I mean, that's the most important thing, right? Is like we don't have to have all the answers, but we
Mhm.
want to model for our students how we search for answers when we don't know them and how, in that way. So that's very cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Yes, I don't know. Let me go look that up. And
Mhm,
modeling, looking it up, right?
mhm,
Um, and then I think we've kind of talked about this too, uncovering everyone's culture, making, helping everyone feel welcome, that it's valid and it's not surface level, right? I genuinely am interested and I genuinely care. I challenge everyone to take Harvard implicit bias test. I had my kids do it in sociology and they would lose their mind. They're like,
yeah.
this is not real and this can't be true. I'm not. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
It's
pretty
been,
sure
it's
people came up with,
Yeah,
I
I
don't
just had
know.
that. Yeah, I just had that as part of an assignment, one of my courses, and it
Nice.
is, it's so fascinating. And I haven't taken them all yet. Like I just keep every semester when I assign it, I'm like, okay, I'm going to take a new one,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And
Yeah.
it's always fascinating to me, at the end where I go, wow, okay, that uncovered some stuff that
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of. So yeah,
Yeah. And that's okay, I think,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because we're human.
yeah,
And how do we know that we don't know? I mean, our own behavior is some of the hardest. We can look around and analyze behavior, but to look inward is pretty difficult as humans. And
yeah,
so I love those.
yeah. I'll
It
put
was
a
pretty
link
fun.
to it here just in case these students are interested in it.
I loved this, you knowing about student achievement.
Mm.
I think the important thing to recognize here is the difference with American Indian students and their achievement. And we have lots of hypotheses, and many people have written dissertations, and we have lots of research that we're looking at to try to find out the root causes of these things. But I think the first thing to do is to recognize, right? We're not deficit thinking. We're not looking at our students and saying you can't do this because, and then enabling them or disregarding them altogether. We are recognizing it, and we are working towards finding what works for that student.
Yeah.
Our American Indian students are way over identified in special ed, right?
Yep.
And we have low graduation rates. And then if a student is SPED and American Indian, I think it's like 70%, dropout rate, right?
Yeah.
So we have to be really cognizant and aware of these things with ELL, and the recognition of home languages and these things with culture, right? Uncovering these things, we're learning more and more and more. But as teachers, we like to say, we have a saying in our office, we don't enable, we empower, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if I recognize and I keep trying and I keep meeting the student where I'm at, and what can I do to help? What can I do to help? Asking them to reflect, asking them to set goals, providing feedback, and, creating cooperative learning, an environment and community of writing and reading and sharing critical thinking. And then recognizing this thing in the background that my Indigenous student might need more help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't know who Elizabeth Fisher is, but
sorry. She is one of my students, and I emailed her to let her know that because I had thought maybe we'd be done about 3:30. So that's okay. We're good. I emailed her though. She's good. So I told her if I don't admit you in, that's what's happening.
So there was a specific question about economics and geography, and I think the Montana Historical Society has some good economic activities. I think it's a good place to start. And again, you're not biting off more than you can chew. It's out there. It's, laid out for you. You go through it, you work through it, and then you're able to expand from there. Somebody was talking about colors. I think you have to be really careful. Colors, again, would be kind of surface level,
Yeah.
but then at the same time, super deep. And that's my cue to take a break. So I turn my lights off, right?
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Time to take a break. So they can be it's surface level on one hand, right, where it's these things that we see and we want to know more about it, but it's actually also very, very deep and super sacred, right? So I've been given permission to share one thing about the Crow culture, which is blue and pink, right? They have this blue, you'll see often in regalia, you'll see in they're not costumes, right? They're regalia. You'll see in Crow culture, it's like a baby blue and a baby pink. It has to do with the sky, and those colors are deeply rooted in story and tradition, and there's a specific story that goes with that, with creation. And so those stories and even shapes are very sacred, and so it's hard to find that information. If you want to know more about them, you would have to be completely immersed in the culture, and you would just get the information along the way. And so that's one thing that I know. Origin stories are the same way, right? Some are readily shared, some are very difficult to find. There is the Northwest Regional site that's linked to OPI that has all sorts of stories on it that we use that are for animals and things like that are more regional. So there's things that are out there. Joseph Bruchac has lots of stuff on stories, and he's from I think Upper New York. I think it might be Iroquois. I don't know for sure.
Mm.
And so he has lots and lots of stuff that's really accessible. The Iroquois really, they have tons of information that they share. But we have tribes like the Gros Ventre who are very sacred and do not share a lot of their ways or their stories and those kinds of things. So
Yep.
it depends on the tribe, the Lakota as well. You have to really kind of get in there. So colors are, you go to enough powwows, you start to notice that the Blackfeet have a tendency to wear blue, or that the Northern Cheyenne have a tendency to wear black, or, but man, it could be right anything.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And it could be very personal as well. Those colors
Yes.
are personal to me. So when we have kids look at things, we say, right, that they're, it's personal, right? So I have a student who his medallia is the jump man for, Jordan or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So if you really want to kind of get into it, this resource has the seals, and then this kind of gives you a start of some deeper understandings of the meanings, because everything on this symbol, just like the American flag, has meaning. The stripes, the stars, the colors, right? All of these things have meaning. So you can, I think this is a good place to start and kind of explore if you're interested in that, if you're more art or something like that. So I think, okay, let me see. I don't want to go too fast. Okay, so this is my last slide. So, okay, so you always get these funny questions, and I sometimes I used to avoid them, right? I used to just pretend like they didn't even happen. But then I've also tried, I'm like, well, I'm going to give this some perspective. And I was like, how hard is it to get your family kicked out of the tribe? And I thought maybe like this could have been something like I would have done, right? Like, man, sometimes I want to kick my family out too, right? And so I've tried over the years to kind of take a little bit more of a lighthearted approach, because I mean, it's hard when you've been oppressed and your culture has been disregarded, and just go look at Native TikTok and the comments on Native TikTok, and you will get a perspective of the things that we've dealt with on a daily basis our whole entire lives. I mean, people called me Chippewa growing up. And they thought it was funny, right? They weren't doing it to be offensive, but it's extremely offensive, and I never liked it. It was terrible. But I thought, well, maybe this is a totally legitimate question. And so I would think getting your family kicked out of a tribe would probably be as difficult as getting them kicked out of the Irish community, right? You didn't get kicked out of being Butte Irish, right? It's the same. Think of it that way. So if that's a legitimate question, that's my answer for you there. I would like to know more about the current living situation. So this is an interesting one because I never know what place this is coming from. So my first instinct with this is to say current living situation, right? So one of the biggest things that we try to avoid, and we try to help people understand, is avoid words like they, their, and them. Because those words are kind of trigger words, right? They're words that are not individualized pronouns, if we want to get to the nitty gritty of linguistics here. So they're trigger words. And so when we say their current living situation, I'm like, well, who is there, right? And so then I take a more, less conservative approach to this kind of question and say, wow, it's a legitimate question, right? What is our current living situation? I mean, if you want to know serious demographics, the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota is the poorest county in the United States of America, with a 70% unemployment rate, no arable land, and no hope of any kind of economic prosperity other than the bison and hemp that they're trying, because hemp can grow there. So when we're talking about the spectrum, and then on the other hand, you have the Seminole tribe, which owns Hard Rock Cafe, right? And so just as any other group of people, we have a wide range of demographics, education levels. It just, with American Indian people, the extreme of poverty has a tendency to be more, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Higher rates of unemployment, those kinds of things. And
Yes.
so my current living situation is Billings, Montana.
Mhm.
You know, I live above Rocky Mountain College, and
Yeah.
I don't have horses but I do have a teepee that I can put in my backyard.
Mhm.
But I don't, you know, this is my home, and
Yeah.
so this is where I am.
Yeah.
I know colors are a major thing with the tribe, and so I kind of covered that
Yeah.
one as well, because I do feel like that, like I said, it's kind of a surface level question, but it might get a weird reaction because they're really sacred, right?
Sure.
And it's so varied, right?
Yep.
We have one flag of the United States, but uh, if we looked at each individual flag of the states, they would have, you know, different meanings, and the quarters are kind of the same way, and they tell us a little bit about it. I think that's why I brought people back to the seals, to
Mhm.
know and kind of understand the seals of the different reservations or nations, and so you can kind of gain a little bit of understanding of the differences, because it's just so, you know, this so varied and different.
Yeah.
uh, and the only one I really have had permission to share is the Crow tribal story, so
Mhm.
about pink and blue. And it has to do with the sun rising, and that's when the creator brought forth the stories of the women, and so it's
Mm.
rebirth and regiving. And when the sun rises, you'll see the pink contrasted with the blue, so it's the sunrise. It's very
Mm. It's
specifically. So
beautiful. Yeah.
yeah, so I actually asked I asked my friend today
Oh,
that story,
good.
so I could share it with you guys. So
Oh, nice. Well, thank him for us.
yeah, I
Thank you.
will. That was Shane Doyle. He's my go
Oh, yeah.
for Crow tribal history and understanding. So, and he's
Yeah.
science guy. So I know I did
Awesome.
a lot of the talking, so I don't know how much chatting we did,
I,
but
we had some and it was great. And I could listen to you talk all day long. And I know you have a lot of work to do. So I am just so grateful that you took time to just spend and look at what they were thinking as they were filling out the survey and being responsive to that.
yeah,
Truly appreciate it. Thank you for all the work you do, JC. Um, just really wonderful information. And I know I've sent students your way at times who are like, I'm looking for a resource, I'm looking for that. You have been wonderful about helping them out. And so I'll continue to do that if you don't mind.
yes,
Um,
absolutely.
okay, that'd be wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much.
You.
I'm going to go ahead and end the recording and then let me just put a